Developing the Research Study by May Andy Aparado from BLIS 3A student. Planning for research. Before we are going to have our research, we have to plan first what we have to do and where to begin. We can't start our research if we don't have to plan it first, because research involves the term analysis, collection of data or ideas, investigation, or conducting a study of the matter. So, how can we do an analysis nor investigation if we don't have any plan of what we are going to do to start and complete our research? So, therefore, let us always put to our mindset that before anything else, planning or making a plan to our research is important and it is always a must. Research is just like the way we live our daily life. Waking up in the morning and next to do is to plan what you are going to do with your entire day until you are going to sleep in the evening again. The scientific method of inquiry. There are steps in scientific method inquiry. First step is you have to make an observation in identifying the problem. Second step is to ask a question. By asking a questions, it is easy for the researcher to gather the data needed so that the problem will be resolved. Step 3 is to make a hypothesis. In this step, we have to make an educated prediction about what we think will happen. Fourth step is to conduct an experiment. After making a hypothesis, we have to make a list of the materials needed to complete our experiment and created a written plan for carrying out the investigation. Step 5 is to draw conclusions. So after completing the experiment, you have to draw your conclusions about the experiments you've done. Test the experiment. And lastly, you have to report your results. General outline for research. There are also a process of a research. Step 1. The research will always begin with a question of some matters. Step 2. Research identify the problem that this question represents. Third step. Researcher should then attempt to place the problem in its broader theoretical framework. Step 4. Librarian should consider developing one or more hypotheses to guide the future investigation or study. Step 5. Librarian will need to develop a plan for attempting to resolve the problem. It is here that researcher must attempt to gather information needed to solve the problem, organize it in meaningful categories, and analyze its significance. And lastly, step 6. The librarian should keep in mind that this process is almost always circular in nature. The researcher's analysis and interpretation of the results of his or her study. Identification of the problem. There are many problems needed to resolve or needed a solution. By identifying it one by one and by planning a research study, some problems that worth to investigate will identified. And as a researcher, you should have to be familiar with your topics or issues to study. You have to know the facts and be knowledgeable. You have to identify problems, gather data, and evaluate your study. Domain assumptions of research. The basic domain questions. The ancient Greeks classified knowledge in two forms: doxa or opinion and episteme or knowledge or truth. This means that two problems that existed for the ancient Greeks are still relevant for modern researchers. The first problem has to do with the epistemological and ontological assumptions. The second one is concerned with the meta-theoretical organization, dynamics, and linkages among theories, paradigms, and disciplines. Understanding the theory of knowledge. Etymology, nature, and role of epistemology and ontology. Epistemology came from the Greek word episteme, means knowledge or truth. The suffix ology comes from the Greek word logos, meaning the principle of reason or theory. So these elements come together to form the concept of epistemology as theory of knowledge. And the term ontology comes from the Greek words ontos, meaning being, and logos, meaning theory. Being is the extended term with the concept of existence subsumed under it. Together, the word ontology is formed to mean theory of being or existence. The role of ontology is to serve as the basis for all things, including the nature of knowledge. And the role of epistemology is to serve as the formulation upon which to build one's knowledge of the world. Subjective or objective continuum. Radical subjectivist, a person who understands that a world of objects is a mere projection of the mind and there is no truly external or objective world. This position is often referred to as idealism. And radical objectivist, an individual who would be labeled a radical objectivist, believes in a world that is entirely nominal and empirically accessible. This position is often referred to as materialism. Method and methodologies. Etymology and the role of methods and methodologies. Methods come from the Greek words meta, meaning from or after, and hudos, meaning journey. These terms can be understood to mean the journey or pursuit after or of some end. Methodology originates with the same Greek term as the word method. Adding now the familiar Greek suffix which is the logos, meaning study, theory, or principle of reason, to the root word method, leaves the word methodology, meaning a study of the plans which are used to obtain knowledge, as defined by Polkinghorne. Next, the disciplines, paradigms, and theories. History and context of paradigmatic change. Disciplines, paradigms, and theories are social constructions. They are not epiphenomenal in their origins. They are creations of scholars and theorists. They are not independent beings with lives separate from their creators. Characteristics of a problem suitable for basic research. In order to be suitable for basic research, a problem should exhibit several characteristics. First, the problem should represent conceptual thinking, inquiry, and insight, not merely activity. Step 2. The variables related to the problem should represent some sort of meaningful relationship. Third step, inherent in a problem representing some kind of relationship between two or more variables is consideration of the cause of the relationship. And lastly, the problem should point to research that is manageable. Statement of the problem. The problem should be stated as precisely as possible. The problem statement should be both specific and explicit. As suggested by the characteristics of a researchable problem, it is also important that it be stated responsibly. Based on lectures by David Clark, suggested writing 3 short sentences. These are the lead-in, a statement about originality, and a justification. The problem is what the research is about, and the purpose is why the research is conducted. Now, identifying subproblems. When we say subproblems, it can facilitate resolving a large problem piecemeal, as they are often more manageable or researchable than the general problem and can be investigated separately. Subproblems should equal the whole of the main problem. On the other hand, the subproblems should not add up to more than the totality of the main problem. So, there are 2 basic steps in identifying subproblems. First, the researcher should break the main problem down into its components, and second, he or she should identify the words that indicate a need for the collection and interpretation of data. Now, let us move on to definition of theory. Theories are formulated to explain, predict, and understand phenomena and to challenge and extend existing knowledge within the limits of critical bounding assumptions. Theories are usually used to help design a research question, guide the selection of relevant data, interpret the data, and others. Formation of theories. Formation theory thinks of the archaeological record as the endpoint, as the future of a past, present, whereas source criticism and sampling theory largely view it as a starting point, the fragmented present of a past totality. Testing a theory. A test theory tells experimenters how to perform particular comparisons between specific theories or classes of theory. Formulating hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? A hypothesis should always explain what you expect to happen, be clear and understandable, be testable, be measurable, and contain an independent and dependent variable. There are also several types of hypothesis. First, the working or research hypothesis. This is the hypothesis with which a research study begins. Final hypothesis. It reflects the findings of the research study. Particular hypothesis, which merely explains a specific fact or situation. The causal hypothesis. It is a hypothesis that states that there is a causal relationship between two or more variables. Alternative hypothesis. A rival hypothesis which provides another possible and plausible solutions to the problem. Null hypothesis, which asserts that there is no real relationship between or among the variables in questions. Inductive hypothesis, a generalization based on observation. Deductive hypothesis, a hypothesis derived from a theory. Non-directional hypothesis merely indicates that a relationship or difference exists. Directional hypothesis, it indicates the nature of the relationship between or among variables. Multivariate hypothesis, proposing a relationship among more than two phenomena or variables. Bivariate hypothesis, proposing a relationship between two phenomena, and univariate, concerned with only one phenomenon or variable. The source of hypothesis, the resemblance between the phenomenon, observations from past studies, present-day experiences, and from the competitors. Developing a hypothesis. When developing a hypothesis, you should ask a question. Writing a hypothesis begins with a research question that you want to answer. Second, do some preliminary research. Third, formulate your hypothesis. And then after that, you have to refine your hypothesis and praise your hypothesis in three ways, and you have to write a null hypothesis. What is a variable? A variable may be thought of as any property of a person, thing, event, setting, and etc. The best way to understand the difference between a dependent and independent variable is that the meaning of each is implied by what the words tell us about the you are using. Aside from dependent variable and independent variable, there are other types of variables, and these are include intervening variables, antecedent variables, extraneous variables, component variables, conditioning or moderating variables, and confounding or interfering variables. There are two stages in testing the hypothesis. Step 1. The researcher deductively develops certain logical implication that can help to reject or support the hypothesis. The second basic step in testing a hypothesis involves actually subjecting it to a trial by collecting and analyzing relevant data. Research design is considered to have construct validity if the variables being investigated can be identified and labeled properly. The design should permit the specification of the actual cause and effect and the identification of the concepts or constructs involved. We have here the validity in measurement. Validity refers to how accurately a method measures what it is intended to measure. If research has high validity, that means it produces results that correspond to real properties, characteristics, and variations in the physical or even social world. High reliability is one indicator that a measurement is valid. And when we say logical validity, it is a simple form of validity where you apply a superficial and subjective assessment of whether or not your study or test measures what it is supposed to measure. Logical validity is the easiest form of validity to apply to research. What is construct validity? Construct validity is basically assessing how accurately your ideas and theories have been translated into actual procedures or measures. The reliability and measurement. The reliability of a measurement relates to the stability or consistency of the results of that measurement. The scales. Scales of measurement in research and statistics are the different ways in which variables are defined and grouped into different categories. Sometimes called the level of measurement, it describes the nature of the values assigned to the variables in a data set. 4 types of measurement scales: nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale, and ratio scale.